Here we go. This is a demo on doing HDR processing in Photoshop. So you're looking at the window in Bridge that shows you these three images that I shot. Please pay attention to the fact that there's a deep shadow underneath the BQE, underneath the freeway, and the building is lit with bright sunlight. That's the kind of scene where this technique gets used because one shot cannot get the detail both in the shadows and in the brightly lit area. So you're shooting three pictures at three different exposures with the same composition, right? If they're not the same composition, it doesn't work out. So I use burst mode, right? Set your camera to burst mode, so you're doing three rapid fire pictures, and I set the camera to auto exposure bracketing. That means you're going to get three pictures. You have to go into your menu and say, I want the three exposures to be different by, I would try a full stop, but you should experiment with that, right? You want three pictures with three different exposures. One that has shadow detail, one that has kind of like mid-tone detail and highlight detail, the sky, that kind of thing, okay? There's no point in doing this if you don't have a contrasty scene. So now you've got your pictures and you select them all. All right, get all three, go up to Tools, scroll down, Photoshop, right? Come over here, Merge HDR Pro, probably processing. Okay, so it's doing its thing. This will happen pretty quickly here, but if you're working with full-sized images, it will take more time. So be prepared for that. Don't get too concerned about the fact that, hey, what's happening, right? It just takes a while to put these three images together. Then you end up with something that looks like this. An image that has detail in the shadows and detail in the highlights, but it needs some refinement, right? The shadows are a little bit too light in my tastes, or in my opinion. So the picture overall is a little bit light. I could try doing that. Take exposure over on the right side panel, drag that down a bit. Ooh, that's too much, right? It's just using the slider. You can also click in this window and use your up and down arrow keys. Although I have to say it's not that's not too responsive for me for some reason lately. Let's just check that out. It's not changing too much. It's working with the slider, and I don't know why it's resisting that. Typically what you can do is move things around by clicking in that window and using up and down arrow keys, but not here right now anyway. Okay, so I can turn the exposure down a little bit because maybe it's a little bit overexposed altogether. All right, that might be sufficient for you. Let me just point out some of the other things that you've got in here. Up at the very top, there's remove ghosts, right? You're putting three images together, and sometimes they don't line up exactly. Sometimes there's a partial exposure of something in the picture, and removing the ghosts can bring in detail that wasn't there otherwise. Doesn't make this picture look too good, so I'm going to uncheck that and go back to where I was. Right, it revealed a car, kind of messes up the windows, right? Edge glow. Most curved surfaces, especially glass, right, that's going to have some kind of like specular highlights on them. It's like reflecting the light source itself, in this case the sun. Right, if you remove that completely, then the picture does not look too, it loses its life. If you put too much in there, it starts to look artificial. Right, this is the light that's on the edges of things, even painted surfaces. You can see there's a highlight there, right? That's what that's talking about. If I bump up the strength, it's going to get overexposed, right? So anyway, I'm dragging that down back to where it was, somewhere in that ballpark, right? So there, now I've got some like edge glow on the edges of these glass blocks and the windows, that kind of thing. I might want to make it more contrasty. I could come down here into advanced, and I can take shadow detail make it go a little bit darker. Maybe I want the detail in there, but I don't really want it to be competing with the building, so maybe I make that area get darker. So it's getting darker in the deepest shadows right there. And vice versa, if I brighten it up, right, it kind of goes flat, right? I don't really want that. Drag that back down. And you do the same thing with highlight, right? You can just make highlight darker, make it brighter. So it's really affecting the brighter areas of the picture. Vibrance, you've probably been playing around with that. Vibrance boosts the color in particular colors. Like there's a lot of red here, it'll boost that red. Saturation boosts colors all over, right? So vibrance is kind of boosting colors that are already pretty prominent in the picture. Saturation just it's kind of like kaboom. It does everything at once, and it's fast and dirty. Okay, then there's a curve deal in here, right? Which, you know, this is another way to affect exposure, but we already did that in the previous panel. You can play around with curves if you want. There's also curves in Photoshop, you know, in the adjustment layer, and I kind of avoid them because it's tricky to work with that. So I just let it go like this. Okay, that's pretty decent, and any more adjustment I could probably mess around with in Photoshop. There's some extreme examples. If you go up here to this custom preset, right? Custom is because that's what I've just done. But there are some presets here that are pretty, I don't know, extravagant. They take it way in another direction like that, right? And you might like that kind of stuff. And it's a preset, and you can make presets too, right? You can make a custom adjustment in here. I'm going to go back to my default. Okay, and that just zeroed out everything. But you can save a preset, right? So if you have generated a particular look that you like, well, you can save that, call it something, whatever you like, you know, red building look or something, whatever, and apply that to other images in the future, right? I'm going to, since I just turned everything back to where it was, I'm going to readjust that a little bit. Okay. All right. So last thing I'll tell you before we say OK and it opens up in Photoshop is this mode, right? 16-bit mode. There's 32, 16, 8. That makes for a very large file. I don't know that 16 is useful right now. Printers and definitely the web doesn't show 16-bit. Printers might, you know, they have that option there because everything's getting better. But that does make for a large file. So you might select 8-bit and go with that, right? Then you have different interfaces here too that you can select from. But I'm going to leave it at that. I'll say OK. Opens it up in Photoshop. Oh, it's so beautiful. Look at that. Okay? And then you could come in here and do some more modification, right? I, for one, might darken the foreground, this cobblestone area there. But that would be, things are up to you. And of course, I'm going for something that looks photorealistic. So I would encourage you to do something photorealistic and then do something that is surrealistic, something that's kind of crazy. Okay? All right. Let's just say Command Save, and here it is, your Photoshop file. Name it something reasonable. You can save it in any file format that you want, just like any other file that you would have in Photoshop. Okay? All right.